Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tanya Subatang, Membership Manager for CFA Society San Francisco. Thank you for joining us for our final career development series. Today on our virtual workshop, we'll focus on leveraging professional designation and discussing what typically overlooked credentials are now gaining traction. Leading our workshop today is Kristen Schriver. Kristen is the owner of the Investment Management Recruiting. She has over 20 years experience in investment management and consulting industry. Welcome. Please join me in welcoming Kristen. Kristen, I think you are muted.
There we go. I think we're back. Are we up and running?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, welcome everybody. So glad we're going to be talking about credentials in the financial services industry today. It's an important topic. We're going to kind of dig in first in talking about the credentials that firms are looking for. And then we're going to statistically look at a breakout of how men and women are driving their careers off various sectors of the industry and how people are applying those credentials. So we have lots of opportunity to ask questions. I love it when things are more interactive. So feel free to interrupt anytime, though I will take a break in between sections for questions. Okay. So to kind of dig in to talk about what firms are seeking, right, when they're asking for credentials, 90% of the time we are asked for the CFA or the CFP, and they are the gold standards of credentials. And it's not that firms aren't interested or like other credentials. It's like they like them as an add-on versus those being the primary credentials that you have. So CFA, CFP, definitely at the top of the list. And then the one that I'm getting more traction on today and that firms are asking me for is the CAIA. So that's the alternative investment focused designation. And sometimes we get asked for an MBA, but I would say that they're kind of second on the list. I think a lot of people associate kind of MBA with more of a finance track, but CFP definitely more asset management track. And then I should include that, on the brokerage side, of course, if you have a Series 7, that's required for the job. And so that's, sought after if you're going to head down that path. And the CAIA is rising in the ranks. A lot of this has to do with the wealth management industry heading and building out their investment team. So I'll address that as well. So firms, of course, they love credentials. They're important. We're asked all the time for them. And we're heavily asked for women with these credentials. And we'll kind of look statistically at that as well. So just in terms of addressing the importance of credentials, because they're so very important, firms view you as just being generally more driven and invested in your career, more knowledgeable in general about the market and the industry. They perceive you as having a greater ability to get up to speed and running within their own firm. And they see you as more likely to be impactful with their clients. So firms also want to advertise the number of credentials that they have within the firm. They use this to set a standard for being able to attract the best candidate talent that's out there, to say, hey, listen, we have all these other CFAs, come join us. And they want to advertise that to their clients as well, to say, look at, we're a sophisticated firm, we hire the best of the best people. So, you see, firms really wanting that kind of status. And I know a lot of times I'll get candidates that are like, oh, well, I'm so good at my job and I don't need the CFA, because, just having that CFA isn't going to change the work that I do on a daily basis. And that's true, but some of this is, it's a little smoke and mirrors, right? It's what the firm wants to perceive out to the rest of the world. So, so they're important and they stick that way. So when you're in a job search, credentials instantly allow you to jump ahead in the line, ahead of candidates without them. And, firms just use it as a weeding tool to narrow down the applicant pool. And they can do this because there are just enough folks that have it or can show that they are through, at least level 1 of the CFA. And there's times where I can't even get anybody into the interview process without CFA progress. And the CFP is there's a little bit more flexibility there in terms of requirements for that CFP, only because the market's so tight for client service associates and associate advisors that you can kind of get away with not having that right out of the gate. But again, if you have it, your candidacy, just jumps to the front of the line because it's so valuable. And credentials do give you a lot more earning power immediately and over time. It's worth the self-investment if your current firm isn't sponsoring that. I do talk with young candidates a lot to kind of help, push them forward to get going on this and just pay for it, because it just pays for itself so quickly, and especially with the next offer that you get. The reason firms are hesitant to pay for credentials is that they're afraid they're going to make you marketable, and then you're going to leave and you're going to take that credential to another investment firm. You'll get that higher offer, right? And so the firms, it doesn't always want to invest in you. So, if you're lucky if a firm is willing to pay for you and invest in you. And it can be a negotiating tool in your job search to kind of leverage that and say, hey, well, if you are a valuable candidate, you can say, hey, listen, if you're willing to, support some of this education, that comes as part of my compensation offer. I see some firms that'll pay for a portion, and I've seen some firms say that if you leave within 2 years, you have to pay that back. So there's some things that firms are doing if they're not fully paying for it that they're using to kind of negotiate and leverage that. Okay, so I'm going to get into a couple statistics here on how credentials impact compensation. And because if you have that CFA or CFP, you pop up to the top of the compensation range. And right now, compensation in general, we're seeing the greatest jumps mostly on the mid-tier associate level candidates. So if I look at entry level, where maybe a couple of years ago entry might have been 50,000, it's squarely 65, 70 today. If you have, I'm going to break out the difference between kind of wealth management and then asset management. So I'll start with some of these wealth management statistics. So if you have a couple of years of experience and progress towards any of your licenses, 6, 63, 65, you're automatically, 72, 75, easy. And then if you have a couple of years of experience and you get a CFP, you automatically jump to 85 on a base. So that's very kind of entry level, and really gives you kind of the range that you can get with that CFP. If you look at sort of the associate advisor bracket, where associate advisors used to kind of start, right? You probably got started in some kind of operations or client service role. So now we're just bumping into that, where you were 85 to 90,000 as an associate advisor. We're automatically now kind of up to 125 on that base. So it's been kind of a nice jump there. And then on the senior advisor sort of rung, now senior advisors have a huge range, right? Because with this, we get into now the size of the firm, underlying AUM, bonus, commission structures. And I would say I see that base up to about 250 today. And that hasn't changed a ton. I would say senior level compensation salaries have kind of leveled out, even if you've got your credentials, because so much of the alternative comp comes from all these different avenues of bonus and commission. So bases have kind of stayed the same. In terms of the investment folks that work in manager research, so in wealth management firms, these are mostly on the manager research side, or you have a client portfolio management title with a CFA. We have made a jump here. So this base used to be around 150, and now this is really 250. So if you've got a CFA, you're working in, you've got really solid experience across, manager research, you're making a nice bump. If you have alternative investment experience, the CAIA, this is even sort of better because we're getting such growth across wealth management. I'm looking at compensation, right, in asset management. Again, we've sort of made some progress here also. So if you've got level 1, with the CFA, I'm really seeing young candidates getting into that 85, 90,000 base range really quickly. And, and if you are, what I tell candidates is that a lot of times they are not necessarily getting offers until they get through level 2 of the CFA. So I get a lot of requests, right, for that level 2 because firms have more confidence that you're going to get through the entire CFA program if you're through level 2. And a lot of times if candidates are just through level 1, I get a pause because they know that level 2, is challenging and they want to see that sort of wrapped up. So you get through kind of level 3, you get a little bit of experience. I find that if you've got at least 5 years, you're now squarely in the 150 base range with your CFA. So it doesn't take long for you to get to kind of 150 on a base with, at least 5 years of experience. So that's really nice. Again, on the very senior level end of things, I'm not seeing a ton of shifts on base salaries. Again, a lot of that excess comp with highly compensated individuals is coming from kind of those base, those bonus structures and that are happening on top of that base. So a little bit of stagnant comp there. So let's, I want to address really quickly, leveraging credentials early in your career, securing those as soon as you can leaving college. Your brain is already in study mode. When you're young, you have more time, right, to go to work and to study. And I always tell young candidates every single year that goes by, life just gets more complicated, right? We have significant others and home ownership and families. And if you don't get on it, it likely won't happen just because it gets so much harder to find the time, right? So I really encourage those of you that are in a mentorship position, or you're leading or working and hiring within your firm, is to really ask and require credential progress of your incoming employees. Make it just part of the cultural expectation of the firm. Consider how your firm can pay for it, because we really do want these young people to have the time and really allow some study hours during the workday. I think this is super important for young people to be able to leverage a few hours during the day for studying. And I know some firms really support that, but I've seen others not, and I think it can make a really big difference. So the other thing is that I really recommend for young people starting the CFA to not advertise that you're sitting for level 1 on your resume or discussing it in an interview unless you've really studied, you're positive you're going to pass, right? Because you never ever want to go back to a potential employer and say that you didn't pass the test. And I know that it's a challenging test, but I will tell you from a perception standpoint, it will hurt you. Firms don't care how low the passing rate is. So once you pass, then you can advertise, right? I've seen candidates add this to their resume, with really good intention to show their desire to learn. But I think some candidates are kind of overly ambitious, not really understanding the time commitment and their ability to get through the material. So I always caution young people when I see, hey, I'm interested in level CFA, level 1 of CFA. I'm like, you need to kind of remove that from the resume. Also, if you put that your intention is to sit for the CFA, this can actually hinder your job search if you're sending your resume out for positions that don't require the CFA. So I've seen candidates get in trouble with this also because firms think you're not going to be happy long-term in their role and that maybe you're just using it as a stepping stone. So really make sure if you have something related to the CFA on your resume that is the career direction you're going and you're looking for that path long-term. Okay. Let's kind of talk about the CAIA, because I'm getting a lot more requests for this specific designation. I think one of the things we're seeing is really explosive growth across wealth management. And assets are really flowing into firms at such a great rate that firms can't hire fast enough. And what's happening is that there's an evolution and expansion of the investment teams. And so in the past, where you might have had, like one CIO managing, all the assets in an RIA, this has really turned into a broader team of analysts and portfolio managers. And it's really because we've got clients now that just, their assets are greater, so they have the ability to diversify. And now the conversation of alternatives is really coming more into play. So, the definition of portfolio management is different, right, in wealth management than asset management. Portfolio managers in wealth management are really working across manager research, but then they're also rebalancing accounts, looking at tax loss harvesting issues, liquidity events. They're coordinating kind of some of these estate planning requests, and they work with wealth advisors to meet the needs of these high net worth individuals and families. So they have slightly different set of responsibilities. And then on the manager research side, we're seeing, just like I mentioned, kind of that AUM of the client portfolios growing. So the trend is having larger allocations to alternatives. And this is really true for a lot of the RAs that are, have clients even in the $5 million AUM space. And of course, really true for the multifamily office space. Because most of the single and multifamily offices are now requiring somebody to have an alternative investment background in the firm. And so we're seeing firms, differentiating themselves by asking for that CAIA. And we even had a firm recently that they were a very, large, well-respected RIA firm that just went out and bought an alternative investment team because they're like, we just need all of this. We need to plug it in-house, and we're just going to buy 5 people that have this. And now we're going to have this alternative investment department to our wealth management firm. So I thought that was kind of interesting and definitely a trend that I'm seeing on the credential front. So let me just take sort of a break there as we've kind of just addressed the issues of credentials. And let me know if you have any questions about any specific credentials or how you're using them today or what you're finding out there.
Thanks, Kristen. We actually do have a question. One of our attendees had asked, how should I pursue a designation after making a career change?
Yeah, so what I think it's, if you can, and that you want credentials, a lot of times I'll get candidates that come to me and say, gosh, my firm isn't really willing to support my path, either licensing or credentials, not willing to pay for that. And I think you have to, like I say to candidates, sometimes firms don't want to do that. And you really want to, invest in yourself if it's just not happening with your current firm, right? You got to get the materials, you got to, make the time for it, know what you want in your career and kind of go after it. But you can, if you're in a transition zone and you're going to be negotiating salary, then, this can be a negotiation point, and it can give you some insight, right, to if the firm's willing to invest in you. So if firms are like, hey, yeah, we're not willing to invest in you, well, you might not even be, interested in working for that particular firm. So, but I do think, you can decide, right, if you want to take, a bit of a break. I've seen candidates have, kind of small gaps in their resume where they come back and say, hey, listen, I took a few months in between jobs because I really wanted to plow myself full time into the CFA study. And I felt like I just didn't have that. I was working so many hours, or I've got, an investment banking candidate that's like, hey, I want to move from sell side to buy side. And I'm working 80 hours a week. I want that CFA, but I just don't have the hours to do it. And I've seen them actually sort of resign and, plow into their studies. There's risk in that, right? And so, you have to know if you have the financial resources to be out of work for, several months to kind of pursue that. But you got to carve out the time. The time is such, when you're working, that's the big, juggernaut a lot of times into getting credentials is, where do those study hours come from?
That's the only question we have so far.
Okay. Okay, so I'm going to, let's go ahead. Do you have the slide that we can pull up, or do you want me to do that? Okay. So I want to move into kind of the second segment of this lecture and really look at the demographics of men and women in the industry. Hold on, somehow I lost. So I just lost my ability to see my own document. Do you know how I get this filled up my whole screen?
You might have to just resize your viewing screen. Minimize Zoom a little bit.
Click on the view screen. Ah, there we go. Okay, hold on. Sorry about that. Just lost my document for a minute, but I can get it back really quickly here. Okay, so what we're looking at here, one of the things that was sort of really nice, just kind of as we got into the start of COVID for me, is that I had a little bit of downtime. So I really wanted to spend some time to dig into this project I had been thinking about for so long. What are the percentages of men and women in the industry in general, and where do we all stand, right, on pursuing credentials? So, one of the reasons that kind of prompted some of this too is I get asked a lot, hey, we need more women with CFAs and CFPs, right? And, because many firms today just would like to be more balanced across men and women in the firm, and firms want more, diversity in general. And, I even kind of think back when I got started in the industry, and when I was interviewing, there were very few women in senior level roles. But, now that I look at it today, a lot has changed. But I was kind of curious, right, to kind of quantify that. So what I did was, I'm physically sort of based in Seattle. So I meticulously looked at the candidates that were sitting in the Seattle and Portland markets. So I pulled up every resume, I looked at every LinkedIn profile, I looked at every company profile, and I really was digging in to discern who had a CFA or a CFP or both. Again, it allowed me to look at the number of men and number of women when I pulled up all of this data. And I think the results are similar or applicable to other regions of the country. Now, I know that there are larger concentrations of, home offices where there's going to be, more investment sort of people sort of sitting in Chicago or New York that could give us kind of greater concentrations of women and diversity in the market. But, I asked the CFA Society of Seattle of their statistics, and they said, only 21% of their membership in the CFA Society is women. But in San Francisco, it's not much different. It's only 24% of the membership are women. So I don't think there's going to be, I think some of the results that I have are going to hold true in various markets. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at these charts. There were over 5,000 investment professionals that just slightly under 5,000 in the broader Seattle market. And then there were almost 2,000 in the Portland market. And the data was very similar between sort of Seattle and Portland. And so the data reflects people in asset management and wealth management. And so I divided everybody up into a few broad categories. Those that were, purely kind of anybody that managed assets. So traditional stock picking, alternative research, wealth management, and those would be across investment, family offices, institutional consulting firms. And then I looked at all of those folks in the wealth management industry. So it'd be kind of RIAs, broker-dealer, high net worth consulting. And then I looked at kind of all the staff, right? So staff, marketing people representing firms. I did not include, if you had a CFA and you were working in the corporate market, you weren't included in this study. So if you had a CFA and you're at Microsoft, those were not included. Just really asset management, wealth management folks. And the individuals were categorized, right? Analysts, I had financial advisors, client service, operations, marketing, and sort of management. So I didn't include other areas like IT and trading and HR and some of these auxiliary roles. I didn't include, I just kind of went after what I would call the big bulk of where sort of people fall within the industry. Okay, perfect. So if we look at sort of this chart, one of the things that you'll notice is, and I'm going to look at the kind of the next screen, we'll break it out a little bit easier. I'm going to move into full screen here. And so with the analyst portfolio management roles, you can see that more sort of men, right, are in kind of analyst roles, quite a few less sort of women, but there's a big shift, right? So when you get into pure client service, then you see that women kind of dominate this category. Again, the kind of financial analysts, male dominated. And I always kind of feel like marketing is a little bit more even, compliance is a little bit more even. I'm going to shift. Can you shift to the next? There we go. Okay, perfect. Thank you. So here we're going to look at this graphic slightly differently. But again, I think the color bar graphs give you a better visual to how that data breaks out among men and women in the industry today. So of course, when we get analyst, portfolio management, CFA types of roles, we just have less women in general in these roles. So you can see why firms, when they ask me for, hey, we want a woman with a CFA, you know, I am like, great, I would absolutely love to help you with that. But now what's really nice for me is I can say, listen, it's harder. It's harder for you to find those individuals in the marketplace. And here is why. Because I think there's a perception, because we do have growing numbers of women in these more technical roles. And so I think firms sort of feel like it exists and it's out there, and I don't think they realize that we're still not even at you know, we're still not moving that bar forward fast enough for them to have a broad pool of candidates for these roles. So it's really good for me to talk about with firms. You know, we can ask ourselves, you know, within client service, kind of why do women tend to grow careers in client service and not really move out of that? I see, you know, men and women kind of equally get started in, you know, client service and operations, because those are really great feeder roles, right, for the market. And then we see men kind of bounce out of those client service roles more often, where women tend to stay in them. And then we're seeing a little bit more on par, like we're seeing greater numbers of women kind of climbing into some of these financial advisor roles, which is good. Management's still way out of whack. I think for women, we are seeing kind of women start more kind of investment management firms and wealth management firms. So, you know, I'm not sure how many years it will take, but you know, I'm going to be interested in doing this study 10 years from now and see if we've made some progress in some of these areas. Okay, let's switch to the next slide. Okay, so we're just going to look at men in the industry today, and typically how men break out into these various roles. You know, the wealth management industry in general is very large, so you're seeing a big segment of that breakout of financial advisors. Again, kind of small numbers across client service, marketing. We've got a really big sliver, right, in management and asset management, portfolio management. So these encompass kind of big swaths of the pie. And then if you kind of scroll down to some of the numbers, I've broken it out. So you can see, I've quantified how many of those analysts and portfolio managers have both a CFA and a CFP, and just a CFA, right? But 40 of those 587 portfolio managers, you know, 44% of those have credentials. I do think it's interesting, right, when we look at the very low number, you know, of people that have both a CFA and a CFP. This is a growing part of the industry, and it really gives you a lot of value. So if you think at all that you want to head down the wealth management path or shift your career in that direction, it's super important for you, I think, to get a CFP in general, because you need that language to work with high net worth individuals. But it also really shows you, wow, there's not a ton of that. And, you can really leverage that. I would say it's kind of the gold standard, right? That you would have both of those dual skill sets. But then, and then you can kind of see that again with financial advisors, right? You squarely are already in a wealth management firm. Again, only 11 have both a CFA and a CFP. So the number there is low. And I think it, again, I would get that CFP and really leverage compensation, because you'd be super valuable in the market sort of with it. Okay, next slide. Okay, so we look at the women, right? The pie chart looks different again, because we have this big, huge 31% of women staying in client service. The thing that I think is interesting, though, is when you head down to the numbers, when we look at the percentage of women that have credentials in these roles, it's pretty close on par to the men. So we're seeing women that are in senior level roles, that when they want to be a senior level analyst, portfolio manager, or a senior level financial advisor, they are equally going after credentials. So that's good. I mean, the number's a little bit lower. I think what we saw on the previous slide was of the analyst and portfolio manager CFA, that number was 44% versus 36%. But in the financial advisor role, the number for the men was in the mid 30s. So so that's good. I mean, I think it's great. We're just having sort of equal, those women are equally going after credentials to some extent at the same percentage rate. And you can see too that of the financial advisors, 7 both have CFAs and CFPs. That was pretty consistent with where kind of statistically about where the men were tracking. And then of course, right, we kind of look at kind of the lower, right, that decline in sort of management sort of positions. Okay, and then I think that, okay, next one. And that kind of wraps up some of these statistics for looking at this. So we can go back to any of these slides, but I would love to kind of, have a conversation about what you guys are seeing with credentials, and how you're using those for your job and applying them, and what you think we can kind of even do about some of this.
We have a question, CFP versus Masters in Financial Planning.
Yeah, so again, what I would say is go for the CFP. I think it is this standardized credential that for the moment is the gold standard of working with wealth management clients, right? And so if you're going to be in all the RIAs ask me for the CFP, all the family offices ask me for CFP. So I never get anybody asking me for anything else. And so I think if you just get those 2 credentials, then you just don't have any other sort of issues. And then you can layer on anything else you want. Like everything else is gravy. But the problem is if you get, sometimes I see people getting kind of an ancillary designation because it might be quicker, faster, or less expensive, right? It's related to the CFP. It might be portions of the CFP, but it's just not the CFP. So unfortunately, it's just not in the same sort of place today. I think if you've been in asset management, you can fast track into sitting for that CFP exam, right? So if you already have a CFA, then you don't have to sit through the module. I think there's 6 educational modules and classes that you have to take to get that CFP. You don't actually have to take those classes. But the problem is that you might not have all of that material underneath you, rules, regulations, there's tax issues, estate planning, there's all of these things that go into that CFP, and you might not have some of that language. But if you're going to shift from asset management to wealth management, and we're seeing a huge trend in that, I think it's super important to go get that CFP. One, it shows anybody that you're interviewing with that you're really are actually serious about wealth management versus asset management. So I can use this example here in Seattle because, you know, Russell Company has gone from the behemoth firm that it was down to kind of 2 floors, right, in Seattle. So it's a highly concentrated version of the firm that it was. We had a ton of CFA level folks that have had to reinvent themselves into the Seattle market, and all of them were like, well, I've got this institutional background, I've got the CFA, I can easily go over to wealth management. And they had a really, really hard time getting hired. And so the folks that differentiated themselves went after the CFP, they really got that high net worth language. They were much more quickly absorbed into the market because they invested in themselves. They recognized that they needed some of that language, that you know, working with institutional clients was not the exact same thing as working with high net worth families. So I think it's, you know, going after that CFP is really important if you want to shift over to anything that's wealth management.
Thank you, Kristen. That's all the questions we have for now.
Okay, got it. Okay, well, no worries. I mean, we'll have, you know, if we, you know, have a shorter sort of lecture today, that's totally fine. And, you know, we're just really here to kind of talk about kind of the importance of those, you know, credentials, looking at the demographics of what the street, right, looks like today, who's getting them, who's not, and how to leverage them. So, you know, that's kind of the point. I know it's not a super long topic today, but if you know, have any other kind of questions about that and how to leverage those credentials, just let me know.
We did have a question again. Where is the best place to reach you or to connect with you? Would that
Yeah,
be
just
LinkedIn?
just find me on LinkedIn. So, and I even think my email address is publicly sort of located, so you're welcome to email me. But yeah, just shoot me a little LinkedIn invite and we'll be connected and we can have these individual conversations.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Kristen, and thank you to everyone who joined us this afternoon. Again, if you have any questions or would like to connect with Kristen, please find her in LinkedIn. Other than that, we'd like to thank you for joining us and hope you all have a wonderful holiday season.
Perfect. Thank you guys. See you later.